This episode is brought to you by my friend Rebecca Walser, a financial expert who can help you protect your wealth. Book your free call with her team by going to friendofdinesh.com. That's friendofdinesh.com. Coming up, is America facing a decline and fall just like the Roman Empire? I'll ponder the somber implications of that. Debbie's going to join me. We're going to talk about Trump, the collapse of border towns like Yuma in Arizona, El Paso in Texas, and the latest in the Bryan Kohberger case. I'll also continue my discussion of how the Big Bang points to an immaterial cause for the material universe that came into existence some 14 billion years ago. This is the Dinesh D'Souza Show.
America needs this voice. The times are crazy. In a time of confusion, division, and lies, we need a brave voice of reason, understanding, and truth. This is the Dinesh D'Souza Podcast.
I was surfing through social media a couple of days ago, and I saw a very short video that someone posted of the airport in Singapore. He has a little video and he says, "I'm just in awe of Singapore's airport." And you see this magnificent airport with a giant waterfall in the center of it. And it reminded me of airports I've seen over the years, recent years, like the airport in Seoul, South Korea, another spectacular airport. Which, by the way, has beautiful facilities, top-notch restaurants. You can have salons, all in the airport itself. And it occurred to me, wow, Americans probably don't know this, but foreign airports today are much better than American airports. You look at places like JFK, which looks like some rundown second or almost third world airport. And the Bombay airport, which used to be a third world airport, you'd actually have to walk on dirt to get to the gate, is now a spectacular, polished floors, beautiful airport. Now, I'm not really here to talk about airports. I'm raising a bigger question, which is America in terminal decline? Now, I remember that when Reagan gave speeches, he frequently would say, in his typical optimistic fashion, our best days are still ahead. Even when Reagan wrote his very touching letter about having Alzheimer's, it ends with, "I'm convinced that America's best days are ahead." But I think for Reagan, this was not a prediction so much as it was kind of a hope that America would hold on to the things that made America special and made America great. Remember, civilizations don't last forever. Here's Edward Gibbon, the historian. "It was at Rome on the 15th of October, 1764, as I sat musing among the ruins of the Capitol, while the barefoot friars were singing vespers in the temple of Jupiter, that the idea of writing the decline and fall of the city first started to my mind." This is when Gibbon gets the idea for writing his great work, The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. And the Roman Empire, having fallen, has never returned. And when we think back, for example, to countries that have dominated the world, by the way, in the 15th and early 16th century, the dominant power was the Portuguese. In the 16th and 17th century, it was the Spanish. In the 17th and early 18th century, it was the French. In the 18th and early 19th century, it was England. And then from the 19th century, the late 19th century, through the 20th century, it's been America. But here we are in the 21st century, and it seems to be that America is losing something permanently. And we have to remember that countries that lose that top position, historically, to my knowledge, never get it back. So this is a permanent loss. And I notice it in all kinds of ways. I notice it, for example, look at, foreigners used to love to come to America. And they'd love to come to America because they'd love to go to San Francisco. Imagine wanting to go to San Francisco today. Who does? They'd love to go to New York because New York was the hippest, the coolest, the most modern city in the world. But today, New York City is unattractive. And I say this as someone who lived there, someone who recently visited New York for Christmas. It's not that New York doesn't have nice things, but other cities are much better. A friend of ours just came back a few weeks ago from Lucerne, Switzerland. He goes, you won't believe the standard of cleanliness, the efficiency, everything works, everything is hyper modern. It kind of puts New York City completely to shame. New Orleans, Debbie and I were in New Orleans a couple of years ago. We have such a romantic idea of New Orleans. But today, New Orleans, it's like you have to look down at your feet because you could be sort of walking in human excrement. It's just absolutely disgusting. And so we left New Orleans by basically resolved. I don't think if we're permanently resolved, but like we don't really feel like going back. There are cities that you'd never think of, like Dubai and Istanbul, that today are cooler, more hip, better amenities, more cultural facilities, a better vibe, certainly more safe, new buildings going up all the time. When was the time they built a new skyscraper in New York? Well, it may seem again that I'm only talking about cities. No, I'm talking about a country in which our cities are now dilapidated. Our rural areas have been in many ways decimated because a lot of the jobs have gone abroad, and so people are pressured to leave these rural areas. So what does that leave? The suburbs. And the Biden administration is declaring a kind of war in some respects against the suburbs, trying to force the suburbs to have diversity in their housing patterns, build new forms of low-income housing, and so on. So they're in a word, they're coming for the suburbs, and that's kind of all that's left. So we have a country now, you've got a super rich and elite that's degenerate. You've got a middle class that's been somewhat hollowed out. And then you've got a poor class, a lot of it an ethnic poor, but also a white poor that is dependent, that is living on a paltry living, that is often has a cultural breakdown, family breakdown. So this is today's America. And it's an America that, it seems to me, is losing its exceptionalism and losing some of the guardrails that secured our society in the past. We're working to fight against all this. We're working to reverse the disasters that are being perpetrated by the left, and the disasters are coming from the left, but too often our own side just stands by the wayside, so to speak, watches these things happen, and lets them happen. Mike Lindell is running a sale on his Giza Dream bed sheets. They are as low as $29.99. Mike promises the first night you sleep in these sheets, you're never going to want to sleep on anything else. The Giza Dream bed sheets are made with the world's best cotton called Giza. This is long staple cotton, which makes the sheets ultra soft and breathable. The sateen weave gives them a luxurious finish. Available in multiple colors, styles, and sizes. They're machine washable and durable, 10-year warranty, 60-day money-back guarantee. We love this stuff. So go ahead, get some for your family. Call 800-876-0227. That number again, 800-876-0227, or go to mypillow.com. Make sure to use the promo code. It's DINESH, Dinesh. Debbie and I are here for our Friday roundup. And I got to start by talking about my outfit. You're like, you look at my shirt and you go, Dinesh, it seems that your shirt is sort of open and you should be wearing a gold chain or some kind of medallion. But then I go, honey, listen, it's the way the shirt is cut. If I actually were to button up this button, let me do it. And look how ridiculous I look.
No, I know. Then you need a bow tie.
I mean, I look like one of these. I don't know what kind of an. Yeah, I mean, this is the absolute nerdy. This is super nerd.
Honey, but you are a little nerdy, so it would go really well.
I know, but I try to give a little cooler vibe, yeah. Whether successfully or not.
Cool nerd. Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Let's talk about this priest, Father Fidelis Mozinski. The Biden DOJ has gone after him for violating the FACE Act. And the FACE Act is you can't obstruct an abortion clinic. Now, let's remember that this FACE Act, by the way, was passed when there was a constitutional right to abortion asserted by the court.
Right.
Now there's no such right. And yet what the Biden people are doing is they're pushing ahead with the FACE Act to go after pro-lifers. Now, this guy, look, I mean, in Hempstead, New York, July 7, 2022, he apparently put multiple locks on the gate to the Planned Parenthood facility. Then the cops came and the fire department, and when they cut the locks, he physically lay down on the driveway blocking cars. So this guy is an activist. I mean, but I don't think, look, leftists do this all the time. They block access to Wall Street. You come and cut the locks. They put and what do the cops do? They drag them off, and then business resumes. Well, apparently,
and look at Antifa, what they do. Much worse.
Much
worse. How many people in Antifa are serving 6 months in jail?
Yeah, exactly. According to the defense, in this case, the rescue resulted in a 10-minute traffic obstruction. And so they're like, look, we're not saying he didn't do something, but it should be a misdemeanor. This should not be prosecuted as a felony. This guy doesn't need to go to federal prison. But unfortunately, this is the...
Well, let me ask you a question. I mean, is there a way that the FACE Act itself could be overturned? I mean, can somebody go to the Supreme Court or whichever court leads up to the Supreme Court and say that they're using the FACE Act to prosecute people that are basically pro-life activists with a FACE Act that really shouldn't even exist? So
well, this is what you're raising is an interesting point, which is this. I believe that the federal government would have the right to pass laws, just like it can pass a law that would say that you'd be punished for unlawful entry into a public building, right? Mm-hmm. They can pass a law declaring that these facilities cannot be infringed. Mm-hmm. However, I think what you're getting at is this. What they're really going after these people for is their views.
Exactly.
They're going after them for their pro-life views, and their actions are minor. Even if you look at that Catholic guy, Joseph Huck, I mean, he was a guy who got into an argument with a Planned Parenthood or a sidewalk abortion counselor. That guy wasn't even escorting anyone to a clinic.
Right.
But nevertheless, they went after the guy for violating the FACE Act. So the FACE Act here is a pretext for going after people. And in this case, you know what? Yeah, he tried to block the clinic for 10 minutes. He was then removed. Access to the clinic was restored. I mean, it seems to me this is what they're doing here is criminalizing pro-life convictions. Yeah. And I think if you could make that case, then yes, you would be able to challenge the FACE Act.
I mean, you know, on the other hand, you know, he is definitely going above and beyond what most activists do, right? But you know what? He is going to get, I believe, a free pass to heaven because this guy is putting his life on the line for the life of these babies, trying to save them. And, you know, on that subject, when I was in college and I would see activists in front of, at that time, abortion clinics, right, near campus, I would be like, guys, what are you doing? Go home. You know, it's none of your business. But, you know, as you know, it wasn't until I had a miscarriage that all of that changed for me and my life, right? And so now I understand why they were doing it. Now, one could argue that it really still is none of their business what somebody does going to an abortion clinic. But I do think that they're trying to educate women and trying to let them understand that there are other alternatives to abortion. You can give your baby up for adoption. It does not have to be aborted. And I think a lot of women don't even know that. I
mean, to me, this is civil disobedience, no different than the kind of civil disobedience that we saw, for example, in the civil rights movement. We all know our digital privacy is under attack. Big tech steals your private information, pictures, chat, and email. Very bad. So is there a better way? Well, yes, there is. Secure, it's spelled S-E-K-U-R, offers secure, instant messaging and email hosted in Switzerland and without using any of the big tech platforms and using Swiss privacy laws, which are the strictest in the world. Debbie and I just signed up for Secure, and we love it. Secure's proprietary technology allows you to communicate privately without fear of spying from big tech companies, your email provider, or hackers. Use Secure to chat or email with everyone, including non-secure users, thanks to Secure's unique features called Secure Send and Chat by Invite. Secure is the solution to stop the theft of your digital privacy and identity. It's a separate email and messaging application that guarantees your privacy. Go to secure.com and take Take back your privacy today. That's SEKUR.com. Use promo code Dinesh to get 25% off for the next 24 months. Debbie continues to follow pretty intently the Bryan Kohberger case, and I'm interested in it also, so we will often discuss the latest developments in the case. I believe the next event, when is the next hearing coming up?
I believe it's June 26th or 25th, something like that, at the end of June.
It's in a few months, but nevertheless, through reports, it appears like we're getting an idea of what the evidence is like against this guy, and you've got
I've got the goods.
You've got the goods on it.
Yeah. So there are 5 key pieces of evidence really right now that we know of. Now they did. So let me go through for those first. So this was basically in the affidavit that they revealed a couple of weeks ago, which is why they arrested Bryan Kohberger because of this.
By the way, just to set a context for people who don't know, we're talking about the killing of the 4 students in Idaho, and a man has been arrested, in fact, a criminology PhD who lived 10 minutes away and was affiliated with an academic institution, actually in Washington State, but right on the Idaho border. All right. So what's the evidence?
Right. So the evidence is that they found a sheath. It's a knife sheath right next to one of the bodies of the girls, right? And that sheath, am I saying it right? Sheath, right. Okay. That sheath has DNA on it. It has touch DNA. As we know now, with forensics being, just amazing these days, now they can do touch DNA. Of course, they can do, blood DNA, saliva DNA, all of that. Everything has DNA, right? So the button had DNA, and that button had his DNA. And the way they were able to get the DNA is they first went to Bryan Kohberger's house in Pennsylvania, because as some of you may or may not know, Bryan Kohberger and his father traveled back to Pennsylvania, which is where he's from. And the other thing that he was doing, of course, is when he went home, he was throwing away things at neighbors' homes. But what he didn't know was that he was under surveillance. So everything he did at his home, they were watching him. And one of the pieces of evidence that they took out, of course, it was DNA from his father. Now, it doesn't mean, and people were like, oh my gosh, his father's in on it. No. The only thing that it means is that they were able to get familial DNA from that piece of trash. So they were able to determine that trash was the father of the assailant, or the person that left behind the DNA, right? So they had that. So that is what's called direct evidence, not circumstantial evidence. So there is already one key piece of evidence that is direct evidence, right? And it is the sheath. Okay. And then the other one is the fact that they geo-tracked him with verification of different cameras that caught his car at the locations where his cell phone was pinging. Okay,
let's pause, because I think we are both thinking the same thing, which is that, in fact, I can't remember if it was an MSNBC or CNN, the host was talking about, oh man, this evidence is so powerful. You have cell phone geo-tracking, which is pinpointing the location of the suspect, who was apparently circling the apartment or the house where the crimes were committed. And then the cell phone geo-tracking is corroborated by, obviously there wasn't video everywhere, but where there was video, the video 100% supported the geo-tracking. And so I thought, wow, this is exactly the type of evidence that was used in 2000 Mules. In fact, was used much more extensively to track a much larger number of people and expose a much wider ring. And by the way, the level of accuracy required in 2000 Mules, much less than in this case, because they're talking about pinpointing the movements of a particular suspect. We were just talking about mules being within a reasonable vicinity of multiple drop boxes. So what I'm getting at is, I think that everybody knows that this type of evidence works, is
Absolutely.
technologically reliable, and
Yep.
is very powerful.
It's called digital phone forensics. So yes, and this is a really interesting little tidbit. So Kohberger at times was so close to the victim's house that his own phone was picked up by their Wi-Fi.
That's amazing.
Isn't
Wow.
it amazing? So yeah, I mean, this is incredible. Now, there's a few other pieces of information, the evidence that we will talk about in the next segment. So stay tuned.
If all home air purifiers are the same, well, why did the U.S. Department of Defense select EnviroCleanse to protect and purify the air on board our Navy ships? Because EnviroCleanse has advanced mineral technology that goes beyond ordinary HEPA filters to destroy airborne illness-causing cold and flu viruses, including COVID. EnviroCleanse is the new science in air purification, and now you can order one for your home. This is how you help stop colds and flu from taking your family down. This is how you destroy allergy-inflaming toxins and mold from the air that your family breathes. In fact, this hospital-grade technology is so powerful it promises far fewer colds and allergies and better sleep. Visit EKPure, P-U-R-E, ekpure.com. Use code Dinesh for 10% off your EnviroCleanse home air purification unit. We just got some for the whole family. You'll also receive a free air quality monitor plus fast free shipping. That's $150 savings, so go for it. It's EKPure, ekpure.com, code Dinesh, ekpure.com, code Dinesh. We're continuing our discussion of the Bryan Kohberger case. This is the suspect who has been arrested in connection with the murder of 4 students in Idaho. And you were just giving us the lowdown on reports of the evidence that they have so far against him.
On the digital forensics, we just talked about that, how it was just really very, very close to the victim's home. The other thing that they also found out was that he had been in that area near their house at least 12 times prior to the murders. So this, again, it links him, digital phone forensics link him to that house 12 times before the murders. So that is very damning evidence. Now, the reason it's circumstantial evidence and not direct evidence, they claim, is because he could say, well, that was not me in the car. That was someone else in the car.
With my phone.
With my phone. Of course, we know that is so far-fetched, but he could say that. He could argue that. And all they have to do is cast a little doubt in the minds of the jurors, and they can do that. So anyway, the other interesting piece of evidence is the eyewitness. The eyewitness was Dylan Mordison. She was one of the residents of that house that was not murdered. One of 2.
Okay, so we need to lay this out. There were 6 people in the house. Apparently, there were, was it 3 floors or 2 floors?
Yeah, I think there were 3 stories.
3 stories. Apparently, the 2 girls who were at the ground floor were not killed. The 4 other people, 2 on the first floor or the second
floor, and then
2 on the third
floor,
were killed. 3 girls and 1 boy. But the 2 girls were not killed, and one of them is the eyewitness that Debbie's talking about. Well, what did the eyewitness see?
So she basically saw a suspect with bushy eyebrows. He was wearing a mask. He was wearing a face mask, so she could only see his eyes. And he was in all black. And she said that he was at least 5'10" or taller with a slim build, like not super athletic, but pretty fit, right? So again, that if you consider this, right? So this is basically her saying this could be him, right? Because she didn't say this guy was 5'3" or 5'4", really fat, which would have totally discounted this guy. But she
Yeah, so I think
happened to
the evidence,
describe him.
yeah, by itself, it's not strong evidence because, of course, she doesn't have a good description, but it would be strong for the defense
Yes.
had she said something like he's really short or he's really huge,
Right,
because
right.
that wouldn't match. So,
Yeah.
so now we come to the, I mean,
Yeah.
are we missing anything? What
no,
else?
well, there were a couple other things. So she also describes his path. And she, where he left the house from, right? It matches the footprints discovered in the scene. So all of this leads to corroborating
Gives veracity
her.
to what she's saying.
Yeah, and then his internet postings, which apparently may not be a motive themselves, but they were quite interesting because apparently, not only was he like in chat rooms discussing the murder itself, but he also attempted to do a query on criminals and how it felt like for them to commit crimes, which steps they took to avoid capture, how they prepared, so on and so forth. So again, this is very damning, and it just really is incredible that this guy did, So again, he's not guilty yet, right? He hasn't been proven guilty by a court of law. But as I told you before, all of these things, they're so damning.
I mean, to me, there are two interesting aspects that jump out. One is, I was thinking to myself, how would you, if you were a lawyer, and he apparently has a public defender, but a very good lawyer, how would you defend a case like this? Is it a case where you try to say, hey, listen, this guy's not guilty because he's pleaded not guilty, am I right?
Yeah, he's pleaded not guilty.
Or are you better off if the evidence is so incriminating that there's no plausible defense? It's obviously you were obviously there, you've left your DNA at the scene of the crime. It's not just your DNA in the house, but it's on the weapon itself.
Right.
So then it may be that you plead guilty and you try to make a deal or a plea to the judge.
So the interesting aspect is there was a story in People magazine that claimed that he was and that I did actually look up to see if he was following these girls on Instagram, and indeed he was, right? But they claim that they got a message, that one of the girls got a message from him several times, like, hey, how are you doing? Hey, what are you doing? Or whatever.
Just something like that.
Several times to kind of get an answer, and he never got an answer. But again, that is a little bit more to the aspect that perhaps he was actually stalking one of the girls. So, all of this
One
just
question in
doesn't
my
look
mind
good.
is, here you have a guy who's a criminology student. And a lot of people who go into a particular field want the experience of what it is like to be in that. So you're an archaeologist. You want to know, what is it like to dive into a pit and be searching for medallions and monuments and so on, buried monuments. Or you're a professor. You want to know, what is it like to be in a classroom and interact with students and grade papers and that experience. So here you have a guy who's studying crime. Now, obviously, I think the majority of people who study criminology are trying to
help solve crimes. Not
exactly.
commit them.
Right. But it's quite possible that someone who's closely studying all this and is studying the criminal mind wonders, what does it feel like
to actually
be
do one.
on the perpetrator end of this? And I wonder if that, obviously the stalking suggests that these weren't random victims, but is it also possible that for him he became obsessed with the experience of actually being a mass murderer? Debbie and I started taking Relief Factor a couple of years ago. The difference we've seen in our joints, nothing short of amazing. Aches and pains are basically gone thanks to this 100% drug-free solution called Relief Factor. Relief Factor supports your body's fight against inflammation that's the source of aches and pains. The vast majority of people who try Relief Factor swear by it. They order more because it works for them. Debbie's a true believer. She can finally do the exercises that she couldn't do for a long time. It's been a real game changer for her her aunt, other members of our family, and for many other people. You too can benefit. Try it for yourself. Order the 3-week quick start for the discounted price of only $19.95. Go to relieffactor.com or call 833-690-7246 to find out more. That number again, 833-690-7246, or go to relieffactor.com. You'll feel the difference. Border towns in America, in Texas, in Arizona, are literally feeling the excruciating burden of the Biden administration's border irresponsibility, of their border policies. Now, there are liberal mayors who whine when they get a busload of migrants that are dispatched from Texas to Martha's Vineyard or to New York. They're like, oh, we don't know what to do with these people. But this is nothing compared to what these border towns, Yuma, Arizona, El Paso, Texas, are living with every day. Now, Biden shows up in El Paso recently, but they clean the place up. In fact, they put a bunch of migrants on a bus and take them over to Mexico. Yeah. So Biden doesn't have to, you don't have the optics of Biden dealing with all these camps and people sleeping on the road. And so you had a sanitizing effect for Biden's presence, but not for the ordinary citizen, because the next day Biden leaves and things are now back to, I won't call them normal, let's say back to abnormal. Right?
And they're getting worse by the day.
They're getting worse by the day.
In fact, the mayor of El Paso declared a state of emergency in El Paso because of the influx of these illegals coming in through the border.
But I mean, this is, normally you have a state of emergency because it's a hurricane, or you have a state of emergency because there's a flood. This is a self-inflicted crisis created by policies of the Biden administration.
And I have to say,
they want it to be an emergency.
I have to say, even though they cleaned up everything for Biden knows exactly what's going on. I mean, unless he doesn't, if you get my,
I do, yeah, sure.
But I mean,
the administration does.
Exactly. The administration knows exactly what's going on. So no amount of pretending that it's not there is going to be the reality.
And, I don't really have a lot of sympathy for there's some of these border Democrats who take a tough line on the border, but they support the Democratic Party that enables these policies.
The interesting thing is they do support them on everything, but not on this.
But not on this.
They're fighting the Biden administration on this. All of the Democrats, which is crazy to say, but they are, because they know that their border cities are a catastrophe right now.
Well, I've noticed that in Arizona, Katie Hobbs, the governor, and but also Mark Kelly and Kristen Sinema have been sounding a different tone on the border than the Biden administration.
A little bit, but I told you this morning that so by the way, in Yuma, Arizona, they're saying that they're on the verge of collapse due to the influx of migrants. But it's also controlled at this minute, as we speak, by cartels. So I wonder if this election, or whatever you want to call it, I wonder how the cartels were helping with the election. Let's make it to where it's really difficult for these Republicans to vote on election day, because the cartels themselves cannot thrive unless they have a Democrat governor.
Well, even if the cartels don't have a direct control over the election machinery, the cartels have huge amounts of money.
Yeah, exactly.
They also spread huge amounts of fear. So it's possible for them to control a certain part of the state. I remember when we saw Carrie Lake, and she was making the point that she felt she was
security.
A target of the cartels. And she said, if I'm governor, it's not going to be easy going for the cartels. So so the cartels have a specific stake here. They want Democrats in office because they know because think about it, the Biden administration is fully aware that it benefits the cartels. In fact, they rely on the cartels to transport people to the U.S. border. That's how they get there. People can't automatically move 800 miles to get to the U.S. border on their own.
And really scary, even more, is the fact that if these cartels control Arizona, they're going to start controlling all the border, like Texas, California, New Mexico, all the border, because what's to stop them? They have an incentive to come into the United States, and they're not being told not to. They're not being stopped. We're sending our soldiers into the Middle East. Why not have them at the border where it matters? Where it actually matters.
Well, this may seem a harsh thing to say, but the Biden administration is itself a criminal cartel. And we see this in all kinds of ways. I mean, first of all, what do cartels do? They engage in illegal activity. They collect huge amounts of money. Now, obviously, the Biden administration isn't like selling drugs, but they're collecting money from countries abroad. The Biden family has been splitting the loot among members of the family. So I think that this is a crime family unto itself. And it fully recognizes that the cartels are a crime family in a different line of business. It's like when, Don Corleone said to the other guy, well, you're in narcotics. We run the olive oil business and we run, prostitution and bootlegging. But that's your trade and this is our trade. And we'll kind of each wish each other well, except in this case, the Biden cartel and the real cartels or the Mexican cartels are working hand in hand in the business of human trafficking across the border. I'd like to invite you to become an annual subscriber to my Locals channel. Now, this is a place where I essentially can operate uncensored. Not only that, you don't just get Dinesh, unleashed, but you also get direct access to Dinesh. So people who are annual subscribers can get exclusive content, come on my weekly Q&A, which is a live Q&A on current issues. Ask me questions online. I respond directly to you. And so it's a wonderful way to participate in the stuff I'm doing in a kind of more intimate way than simply listening to the podcast. So I'm recommending it not as an alternative to the podcast, but in addition. And I've also been uploading some very cool films, not just my films, but other people's films to my channel. And if you're an annual subscriber, you get those for free. You get 2,000 Mules, but also a bunch of other movies. And I'm putting my old movies on there as well. The annual subscription, $50 a year. That's less than $5 a month. It's a great way to support my work. So sign up, if you will, at dinesh.locals.com. I'd love to have you along for this ride. Again, the website, dinesh.locals.com. There's a quite telling and I think almost amusing post by Donald Trump on Truth Social. I'm just going to read it. One of the greatest privileges I had as president was firing Deborah Birx. Now, that's comedy right there because Trump is acting like this was a monumental act that he did, one of his most memorable things. But of course, Deborah Birx, anyway, she gets the boot. The only thing she had going was nice scarves.
That's the funniest part of the whole
I guess that's what people noticed about Deborah Birx, so sort of these stylish scarves. And here's Trump going on. I remember so well when she was lecturing the American people not to leave their homes for Thanksgiving, and then she traveled hundreds of miles to visit her family, who incredibly turned her into the police.
That's really funny.
The only one who thought highly of her was herself. So this is a classic Trumpian put down. He does it like nobody else can. And the thing I find funny about it is you could actually read this and not know it's Trump, and know just from the language that it's Trump, right?
No, it's Trump. But honey, we were talking about this, about Trump yesterday, and just saying how, this, I know it gets to him because he did admit that it really does get to him. However, he doesn't behave as though it gets to him, right?
Right.
Because it's almost like he kind of thrives on it. I don't really know. I think any other person would literally be done, defeated by now. They would just be hiding under their desk, not wanting to do any kind of public office, but not Trump.
No, I think Trump is clearly, first of all, he's a unique character. There's an element in this that is, I won't say childish, but almost childlike.
He's honest. He's
right.
Brutally honest.
Which we are as children. I once heard a comedian go, well, he was talking about what it's like to be 8 years old. And he goes, well, if an 8-year-old tells you you're ugly,
You're
ugly. What he meant is that at 8, you're not taught to censor your opinions.
Filter.
You have no filter.
Yeah.
And Trump has some of that. But the point you're making is that, and I think this is really why the left is so unnerved by him. They feel like we've put so much pressure on this guy.
Yeah.
Multiple investigations. We're raiding his home. We've got criminal trials going on in New York. We're trying to get him in Georgia. He's banned on all the social media. And so the human response is to kind of go under the desk.
Right.
I don't know another. I mean, even think of people who we think of as being pretty tough. Think of the best people that we have in politics. Think of people like, well, Josh Hawley, Ted Cruz, Ron DeSantis. Would any of them hold up under this kind of withering?
I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
I don't know any human being that could and would. What makes it so amazing is that we know Donald Trump, on a personal level, and we know he loves this country. So we know that this drives him a lot. Now, I don't know of any other person that loves this country, but kind of loves themselves more because they don't want to take the heat. They don't want to take the abuse, the constant abuse every day that the media and the left give them. And so, yeah, I mean, I think anybody else would be like, you know what, guys? I actually have a really nice life, and sayonara. I'm a billionaire. I'm leaving. I'm going to enjoy the rest of my golden years, and I'm not going to worry about any of this stuff because you know what? The minute Trump would say that, they would stop. All investigations would cease. I bet.
That's a really good point. I think part of it also is that Trump, we see a hint of this in the kind of scrappy New York style, but I think with Trump, you have a guy who does value his brand. Mm-hmm. He does value what he stands for. And he has a sense of built-in indignation and outrage at what is being done to him. And so even though the normal tendency is to back off, I say this because I feel on a small scale I'm like this. Oh. Where after my case with Obama, if anything, I became stronger.
They radicalized
a little bit. Yeah. In personality, I'm not that way. But
I don't think so. No, but I don't think even you would take this abuse. I really don't. And I don't. And as your wife, I would not allow you to.
I mean, there's an element here where the left has pulled out all the stops, and they've pulled out all traces of decency. So what's so ironic is they accuse Trump of being indecent when they're indecent. They accuse Trump of having no limits. They have no limits. They accuse Trump of being tyrannical. He's not. They are. And
I know.
So,
and I always say, they're like, oh, Trump is a dictator. He was a dictator. He was a fascist. And I'm like, well, then he really sucked at his job because
what kind of a fascist operates like this? I mean, what kind of a fascist calls an insurrection that's unarmed? Think of Mussolini's March on Rome. When Mussolini and the fascists, when they were heavily armed, this was a group that was full of veterans. They could exercise real intimidation.
Yeah.
Hitler's crackdowns, he could exercise real intimidation because he mounted armed insurrections and not unarmed ones.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the Big Bang theory of the origin of the universe. And as I mentioned yesterday, there was a rival theory called the steady state universe that was, as late as the 1950s, supported by a majority, 2/3 of American scientists. But then there was a single discovery that occurred that completely settled the case in favor of the Big Bang and essentially got rid of the steady state universe is eternal theory. Now, in the 1960s, there were 2 radio engineers working at Bell Labs. Their names are Arno Penzias and Robert Wilson. And they noticed that there was a strange kind of radiation that was coming and affecting their instruments. But the radiation was not coming from somewhere. It's kind of like you hear a noise and you're like, where's the noise coming from? Well, in this case, the radiation was coming from not only all directions, but it seemed to be coming from the universe itself. And as Penzias and Wilson began to look further, they're scientists, they're like, we got to figure this thing out. They realized that Scientists had been predicting that if the universe began in a hot fireball, a primordial explosion 14 billion years ago, some of the radiation from that original explosion all that long while ago would somehow still be around today. And scientists were able to say, all right, based upon our calculations, we think that this radiation would have a temperature of around 5 degrees above absolute zero. So Penzias and Wilson begin to measure this radiation, and it comes in a little bit lower than that, but very close to that number. And so Penzias and Wilson realize, oh my God. They realize that we actually are encountering a ghostly whisper from the original moment of creation. Now, Arno Penzias and Robert Wilson, first of all, they won the Nobel Prize for this discovery. Number two, I think it was, I don't remember if it was Penzias or Wilson, I think it was Penzias, who said basically that this is a complete vindication of the book of Genesis. In other words, that this shows that the universe had a creation event. It settles the argument in favor of the Big Bang. By the way, since then, there have been numerous other ways, including NASA's Cosmic Background Explorer, the so-called COBE satellite, have confirmed the existence of this so-called cosmic microwave or cosmic background radiation. And really what scientists were able to do is predict, based on the Big Bang Theory, that there should be in the early universe this much hydrogen, this much lithium, this much deuterium, this much helium. By the way, the original universe didn't have any matter in it. It was made up entirely of gas. But scientists could predict which gases and in what proportion. And guess what? When you began to look at the cosmic microwave background radiation, you realize that it is the exactly correct predicted proportion of these different elements. And so once scientists saw that, they realized, look, the Big Bang Theory is correct. In fact, it's more than a theory. It's essentially an accurate description of the beginning of the universe. Now, let's turn to the book of Genesis. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, first of all, this is an odd way to begin the Bible. The Bible didn't have to go here. The Bible could have just started with, the Garden of Eden and Adam and Eve. But the Bible went out of its way to make an astonishing assertion about the beginning of the world itself. And by the way, if you think, this is something that all religions assert, nonsense. On the contrary, the Bible makes a claim that is different from other religions. In Buddhism, for example, we learn about the fact that there are multiple world systems that are constantly in a state of coming into being and passing away. Hinduism and Buddhism posit endless cycles of time just stretching into the indefinite past. The Greeks and the Romans believed that the universe was eternal. So the biblical writers were, in a sense, iconoclastic in going against, let's call it, conventional wisdom of their day and stating definitively, and by the way, on the basis of no experiments, just barely divine inspiration, this was the beginning and the universe was in fact created. Now, there's an ongoing debate about what the Bible means, and I'll discuss this on Monday in more detail. When the Bible talks about the days of creation, does a day necessarily mean a day? We'll get into this in some more detail. But the important point here is that the Big Bang is a startling vindication in the 20th century of a biblical text that goes back 3,000 years. It's a startling vindication of those of us who are believers or theists, and we're looking for independent corroboration that the universe had a beginning, and it must have had an immaterial cause. Why? Because it was the cause of all the material. Every material object that we know of in the universe was in fact created. It was created by something that couldn't have been itself material. And so the Big Bang to this degree is a vindication of, here's the scientist Gerald Schroeder. These commentaries, he's talking about the Bible, were not composed in response to cosmological discoveries as an attempt to force an agreement between theology and cosmology. Theology presents a fixed view of the universe. Science, through its progressively improved understanding of the world, has come to agree with theology.
Subscribe to the Dinesh D'Souza podcast on Apple, Google, and Spotify, or watch on Rumble, YouTube, and salemnow.com.